Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me for BraunWeiss Team Talks, our informational webinar hosted by BraunWeiss Management Consulting Group. I'm Chayton Durham, and today I'm going to be discussing process flows. But before we get into that, I would just like to give a thanks to BraunWeiss for hosting me today. As you guys know, BraunWeiss is a leading technology solutions company performing digital solutions and financial transformations projects. Great, so let's go ahead and dive into what are process flows. Process flows are essential business analyst artifacts that illustrate a high-level view of a client's business process. What do we need, though, to create a process flow? Process flows, to make a great process flow, you need to identify the data inputs and outputs. That means the components, the direction of data flows, and different types of channels. The next we're going to need to know is the general business processes. So what's going where and what's coming where. The next is going to be documentation that goes along with each process. The next is going to be distinguishing what is a data flow versus what is a financial flow. And then we're going to get into, color coding, color theme, icons, and images to kind of really help bring that process flow from some arrows to life. Next, let's first talk about identifying key process elements. The first thing you need to realize is that there is going to be many components involved, but there's going to be two big players. That's going to be yourself and your client. From there, you need to determine what is the process that you're trying to illustrate. Is it going to be payroll? Is it going to be general business practices? Once we've illustrated what the process is going to be, then we can map out the process flow. And that's going to be the third step. From here, what we'll do is we'll take the steps that involve, let's say, for instance, this example illustrates payroll. So for that, the client is going to be responsible for sending employees to either their locations or to their clients' locations to run their type of services. The next is going to be the employees submitting the payroll or their timesheets back to the client. From there, the client will need to, issue payments via the bank. And that's where we'll come in at BraunWeiss, and we're going to take the back end there. So we're going to, recognize all of that just all of the money that hit their bank account from, the invoices to the payroll, and we're going to reconcile that. And then we're also going to be remitting our taxes or the client's taxes to the government. So that's a standard elements for a payroll process flow. So let's talk about a little bit of data input and data output for this process. So if you see here, there's a lot of arrows, and it can be very overwhelming at first until we break it down line by line. It's kind of this exact same process I was just talking about. Here's the client we have. As you see, the client's employees are sending them timesheets. From here, the client's customers are also paying their invoices, which go directly to their bank. And then from there, the client themselves are taking the money out of the bank to pay back to the client. Next is what we're going to see is about the BraunWeiss step. Here, the client is submitting some reports to us, and we're sending them back financial reports at the end of each month. Then we're going to talk about the reconciliation of the ERP system that they have. And then we'll get into finally the government remittance here, which you can see the client will upload the amounts, and then from their bank, it will be withdrawn. Next, let's get into how we distinguish between data versus financial data. So in general terms here, the blue lines just represent any type of non-monetary data. That can just mean hours that an employee has worked, some reports, even though they're financial reports, they're not representing any type of monetary value. So those reports would just be highlighted in blue versus reports of, or not reports, flows of actual cash or money. You can see from the bank account to the employees that there is a green line, which represents the financial data of payroll. And there's one from the customers to the bank, which represents paying of invoices. The last and final step to add to any process flow is going to be a short description, icons, and images. With your description, you really want to keep it short and to the point. The description is great because for any bystander who comes by, they can say, oh, this line clearly represents salary payments. Makes sense. This line clearly represents transactions from the bank that are getting recorded into the ERP. And then the next thing is going to be adding those icons, which really adds that final element of kind of user friendliness and user engagement. Those elements are kind of going to be like showing the report that's going to be submitted. Here we're using, the dollar sign instead of just writing money. Here we could be using, ACH kind of icon, and here's a check icon, which shows there's 3 different ways to get, your salary for them. Here we're using a bank instead of, writing the word bank. With using icons though, you need to be very concise with what you're using and making sure that the icon accurately represents the institution or element that you're trying to reflect. Well, again, thank you everyone for joining me today, and thank you BraunWeiss for hosting me. Have a great rest of your evening.